Hi there, this is Jonathan Ginsberg. I'm a Social Security Disability attorney in Atlanta, Georgia. And I'd like to talk to you about something called onset date and amending your onset date. And basically, when you apply for disability, Social Security asks you, when did you become disabled? And sometimes people come up with a date that was when they were first diagnosed with a medical problem, or it may be a date that they stopped working, or it may be a date that they started working less time. It could be anything. Sometimes it's a date that the Social Security representative, the telephone representative, gives you. So basically, you have control over that. We can always change the onset date. And the best onset date typically is going to be a date after you stop working where your condition deteriorated to the point where you simply could not perform any kind of work 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. So if you need to change the onset date, of course, talk to your lawyer about that and make sure that the onset date makes sense. I've had a few cases over the years where my client alleged an onset date 20 years ago. And basically, the argument was, well, that's when I was first diagnosed, first started having problems, and I've struggled ever since. If, however, you've struggled but you've worked, using that 20-year-old date's not really a good idea. Similarly, it's difficult to argue 20 years ago if there's not a lot of medical record. Judges get really uncomfortable going back that far in time, even though it may not impact the benefit payment. They have to explain their decisions to their superiors, and to try to say that someone became disabled 20 years ago, that's pretty difficult. So I prefer to keep my onset date the last 2 or 3 years if at all possible. And in that same line, it's also important to be prepared to amend your onset date. So if we look at your file and we see that you went back to work for 7 or 8 months after your original onset date, we want to change that onset date to some date after you stop working. If there's no medical evidence that exists contemporaneously with your onset date, we may want to change the date or be prepared to. I don't necessarily go in to the hearing and start changing things, but if the judge asks, I'm prepared for that. So it's definitely something I go over with my clients, that the judge in this case may want to change your onset date because the medical evidence is not really strong before a certain time. So be prepared to do that. Think about it ahead of time. This is not something you want to be doing in the middle of a hearing, because the judge will typically say, if you want to go outside with your client to discuss changing the onset date, you can do so. But I don't like to start trying to explain onset dates and try to figure out payment issues and so forth. It's much better to do that ahead of time. But I would tell you to be open to changing the onset date if your lawyer feels that the medical evidence will not support the original date. Sometimes you want to hold firm if you think that the medical evidence does support it. Sometimes you have to challenge the judge and say, I'm going to dare you to deny me given the evidence here. But that again could result in a denial. Then you have to go through the appeal. So it's really kind of a judgment call. But I just raise it so that you know that it's possible to change that date. That you probably do want to change it if you are alleging onset before you went back to work for a period of time, or when there's no medical evidence, you can certainly change the date. And it's just a strategy that you may want to use to show the judge you're reasonable. Again, judges don't like people to be greedy. If there's no evidence there, you're going to come across as being a lot more reasonable if you're willing to change that date. So I hope this has been helpful in explaining how onset dates work and when you should change them. Any questions, please let me know. Until next time, again, I'm Jonathan Ginsberg, your Social Security Disability attorney, and I hope to hear from you soon.